Hello, and welcome to the Costume Society of America Conversations on Dress. My name is Sarah Marchetti, and it is my great pleasure to serve as past president of the Costume Society of America. I am joined tonight by my friend, colleague, and co-author, Dr. Elena Karpova, who serves as the Putnam and Hayes Distinguished Professor in the Department of Consumer, Apparel, and Retail Studies at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. Thank you for joining us in this fourth and final panel focused on the book, The Dangers of Fashion Towards Ethical and Sustainable Solutions. Elena and I had the goal of creating a resource that would be useful for educators, for industry members, and especially for people with an interest in fashion and sustainability. The book includes 22 leading experts in the apparel field and covers really all of the topics of apparel, from the creation, from that design concept, through consumption, production, manufacturing, all the way through disposal. Tonight, we are joined by three very esteemed colleagues who will be talking both about their book chapters as well as envisioning a sustainable future. I turn it over to my colleague, Elena Karpova, to introduce our panelist.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Unfortunately, our webinar series is coming to an end. And so in the last session, we are going to look into the future. I am very excited to introduce our first panelist, who I know since the time when we were graduate students together at UNC Greensboro. Dr. John Brookshire is professor and chair of the Textile and Apparel Management Department at the University of Missouri. The areas of your research include moral responsibility of corporate sustainability, global supply chain and sourcing strategies, and sustainable production and consumption of textile and apparel. Thank you, John, for opening the session today.
All right, thank you, Elena. I can't believe that was almost 20 years ago, right? All right, thank you so much for having me. So this book chapter is really about how do we, I would say, assess, regulate, promote, evaluate ethical behavior in professional setting. Can code or handbook or rules or whatever, can we judge ethical behavior by codes or rules or anything? So this book chapter is really about from my personal and professional experience that I personally had to struggle as a sourcing manager back when I was working in the industry. As a young professional in the industry, and especially as an immigrant, it was really difficult for me to judge what's right thing to do versus what's legal enough to do. Like, certain legal activities in the business may not be ethical, or some certain ethical behavior sometimes not legal, depending on where you are or what country you are. So I had all kinds of different ethically challenging situations. I had it all along in the back of my head. And then about 5-6 years ago, I found this new child psychologist, moral development psychologist. His name is Lawrence Kohlberg. He said all the children go through the 6 stages of moral development as they grow up. Basically, you don't have any moral ability to decide what's ethical or not, so don't do what you're told, or the let's make a deal, or be nice to others, all the way to the level 6, which is fair to all. Like, whatever I'm doing is beyond and above my personal interest. I need to do something that is fair to everybody. So that's where this 6 stages of moral development. So I interpreted that I feel like I went through this thing even as a sourcing, even as a professional, as a 23-year-old brand new assistant to a 32 years old sourcing manager traveling all over the world and facing all kinds of different situations. So maybe this theory can be applied and interpreted in a professional settings as well. So this chapter briefly talk about what these 6 stages are look like, and then how this type of behavior can exist in a fashion industry. So I have a specific example with people's name. Suppose this would happen, and Jane wanted to do that, and Phil wanted to do that. What do you think? If we don't make an ethical decision at this stage, what the whole industry is going to be like? So I go through every chapter, explain what the theory says, and then I gave an example of what could possibly happen in the business setting, fashion industry setting. And as you read it, if you ever had a chance to read it, all those names that I kind of supposedly used as a pseudo name, one of them is always me, because it's a lot of them is my story, and I didn't know what to do. And sometimes I could make a decision, sometimes I couldn't. So if you had any thoughts or comments about it, please reach out to me. Hopefully that will resonate you. So the next page, the finally is that people always said in the industry, oh, the bottom line is, or this is a business decision. I understand all of that, but at the end of the day, this is a business decision. I heard it so many times as a sourcing manager, but the reality was that it doesn't have that dollar doesn't have to be a winner at all time, because there's a lot of different way and creative way to make a decision that are fair to all as well. If we all are at the stage 6 as a professional fashion industry professionals. So that's what this book is about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. As an educator, I certainly want my students to learn while they're in school how to make ethical decisions.
Yes.
What can you do in the classroom to help them learn this? Do you have any suggestions or tips?
So I have a really interesting story, and students think that was the hardest thing ever do. So I don't, at the end of the day, what am I going to say? I mean, you have to be ethical, you have to be morally responsible. Otherwise, I'm going to give you, C or B. That doesn't happen. And everybody's standards are different, and everybody's at a different stage. It's not that they don't want to do it. Sometimes they may not be in a situation or a capacity to do it. And you can't penalize for that. And we all make these mistakes. And that's what the college time is about. So you know what I do? So I don't have an attendance policy no more. And I say, so I don't have an attendance policy, I don't have cheating policies or whatever. I just say, you know what? If you cheat, I may not know it, but you know it, okay? If you don't come to class, I may not know it, but you know it, because I have big class. And I say, I'm not going to chase after whether you met this code and that code or that rules or not, because the world, the universe, and somebody up there will know it. So at the end of the day, every little cheating that you're doing today, when 20 years later, because you've been cheating away everything that you're doing, 20 years later, you're going to be in a different situation than somebody who didn't cheat. So I'm not going to judge you whether your attendance point is 100 points or 5 points, or you and I will argue about. I'm going to say, I lived my life enough, and I've seen enough of what's going on to other people. And I said, the universe will take care of you. I don't have to take care of you. The universe will take care of you. So if you really want to be a successful professional, you should be responsible for your own behavior. If you ever made a mistake, you need to come out and come clean and learn from it and don't do it again, instead of trying to get extra 5 points from me, because that doesn't matter at the end of the day. So I say that as my attendance or honor code or whatever, in the syllabus. And students come back and say, oh my God, that was the scariest attendance policy I ever had. People who listen, people who are really there to learn, they take their messages seriously. And people there just to get a credit, so they go out and do that, they do that. But the thing is, who am I to judge that? The career will tell you whether this person has been successful and reliable and trustworthy person or not, because this person didn't show up, this doesn't person. So that's, I know I'm very naive in there, but I've been having good, attendance because even with that policy, and students and graduates still come back and say that was the hardest and difficult attendance policy we ever had. So it is difficult. It is sometimes we have to be careful about what's right to me. Sometimes it may not be right to them in a situation that we don't know. We do have to be careful about, and also just be nice or be ethical all the time is not going to work it either. So it's really, we need to create a situation where students can actually face the dilemma and being able to make a decision and being able to live up to it, I would say, fess up to it if they made a decision. That's all I can say.
Thank you, Jen. Another question, on a more global level, how can we ensure that we will get all as a society to this highest stage, fair to all, sooner rather than later? What can all of us can do to get there?
So one thing I learned is I can't force this to people who are level 2, because one example is when they're hungry, they don't think about saving others because their stomach themselves is empty. So I don't think we can make everybody to be at the stage 6. That's not how human society works, because everybody is at a different development level. So, but the country or society who can be at level 6, we are the one who have to show the leadership. So we are the one who have to show what could be possible, so that the countries or society that are not at that level can look up to it and try to be like this. Because if there's no role model and no leadership or nothing to look up to, we don't know that stage, that word exists. So that's where I say this speaking out, like Jana used to call this ethical courage, right? Do you have the courage to step up and be a role model to other people? If you are truly at the stage 6, you will be able to, because you don't worry about the consequences that much, because you really believe that this is the right thing to do for everyone. So that's where the leadership and countries like us and our business and fashion industry, we have to be the role model. I mean, I truly believe that what American company demanded what other vendors or suppliers should do, that changed a lot of environmental policies and labor policies. And yes, we need to start with the policy or code of conduct and things like that until it becomes part of culture. So what we do matter, and what we teach our students matter, because our students will become the buyers, or whoever the influencer of the people who may not be in that same level as we are. So, but it doesn't mean that we should be the elitist. We know it all and everybody should follow us. That's where the big mistake happens, because that's where we lose our humble and our own context. So we need to learn together, local context as well. But what's right, ultimately, to all human beings should be right, no matter who you are, no matter where you are. Just like nobody should kill each other, right? Just not. Like, no matter, even if I'm a business CEO, I shouldn't kill people living around there by doing my own business through, bad environmental practices. Right. So, did that answer to your question?
Yes, thank you so much, Jen. Wonderful answer. So we will move to our next panelist. Thank you, Jen.
Mm-hmm.
I am thrilled to introduce Dr. Nancy Hodges, is the Burlington Industries Distinguished Professor and Head of the Department of Consumer, Apparel, and Retail Studies at University of North Carolina, Greensboro. Her research interests include examining the role of industry dynamics within community contexts, as well as issues of higher education and employment relative to the US and North Carolina textile, apparel, and retail industries. Some years ago, Nancy served as my major professor and dissertation advisor. After graduation, I was fortunate to continue to work with Nancy on some research projects. We examined how the global nature of the industry determines skills and knowledge our students should have to be successful in this global industry. We also studied apparel entrepreneurs and were very lucky to travel to Russia, Australia, India, and South Africa, and of course, in the United States as well. With that, I am turning it to Nancy.
Great, thank you so much, Elena. That was a really nice introduction. So yeah, it's just so cool to see both you, Elena, and Jung, and how successful you both have become, and it just really makes me happy to see that. And I really am very happy to be here, and I appreciate both you and Sarah's invitation to be on this panel. I'm going to shift gears a little bit, talk a little bit more about the human element that Jung was talking about that really does sort of characterize the industry regardless of where it is. It's comprised of people. And my chapter in the book is called Exodus to Elsewhere, and it reports on a 10-year study in North Carolina that I've been working on that looks at the employment dynamics and the changes at the human level, at the level of people and individuals and their communities that have been impacted by some of the global shifts that we've seen over the last several decades. So just to give you an idea, in the South, in the southern United States, we really were the sort of seat of the textile and apparel industry for several decades. And it wasn't until around the middle part of the 20th century that we started to see that change. Apparel manufacturing was really the first to go elsewhere and to become more automated. That was around the 1960s and 70s. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, that was really when it hit the textile industry here in the southern US. So just to give you an idea, in North Carolina, in 1997, there were around 220,000 jobs in textiles here in this state. By 2003, that number was cut in half, down to about 116,000. About 5 years ago, in 2015, there were about 60,000, so another 50% reduction. So, really a lot fewer jobs. And, with each of those job losses, that's a person. That's a human face that we can put on globalization and the sort of sea change of the industry. It's not always a face we think about, the American industry worker, but it's one that I've been looking at in this study. This chapter reports on, like I said, a 10-year study. I looked at 5 different textile towns in North Carolina. By textile town, I mean they were actually towns that were founded by a textile company. Most of them were founded in the late 1800s, early 1900s, in what's called the Piedmont area of North Carolina, which is sort of the central area of the state. Each of the 5 towns sort of grew up around the textile company. They started as what are known as mill villages, where people didn't just work near or in the mill; they lived near the mill in housing built for the workers. There were schools for their children. Medical care was usually provided. There would be typically a community center, a company store, and just sort of ancillary businesses, retail and service businesses that would kind of grow up around the mill villages to create textile towns. So the data that I have collected for this study include interviews with approximately 60 different individuals, including former textile workers, industry leaders, local historians, business owners, former company management, even community college administrators. Other data included archival sources, company records, and observation in the different communities at Chamber of Commerce meetings, anything sort of public, any public opportunity to observe. So ultimately, across all of the data that have been collected, there were sort of 3 stages that emerged that sort of tied in the 5 communities. The first being the impact of change, the second being moving forward, and the third being merging the past with the future. This is a quote from one of the participants, Helen. She's talking about the devastation that was caused when the company that the textile town was built around closed its doors. So she talks about how the company did so much for this community in the way of pride to have a product, which in this case was towels and sheets that was made here by people that you knew and sold all over the world. So really this first stage or kind of phase was characterized by the actual closing of the company or bankruptcy, whatever happened to have the jobs go away. And I think at the same time, sort of the realization that, yeah, it was kind of ideal. You have this company that provides housing, childcare, etc., but it left everybody very vulnerable, including the community, because when your primary, tax entity is no longer there, it's not supporting community services like water and electricity or things like even the Little League. A lot of these companies actually, did things in the community to support it. And so when the company closes, the community suffered quite a bit of devastation. And this happened across all 5 of the communities in my study. Now, the second phase, the idea of moving forward, you have to move forward, right? Try to anyway. So what you see in this picture here, a couple of photos that I have taken of vacant mill buildings that sort of characterize the different communities in the study. This is very typical when the textile town sort of suffers the first blow, the impact of change. Lots of buildings being left vacant. Several of the towns in my study have spent a great deal of time and effort trying to do what's called adaptive reuse of these buildings. So several have been turned into, for example, apartments, retail spaces like coffee shops, trying to attract people back and to make those buildings usable once again. So that's one very clear way that these communities are trying to move forward. Several of them have developed downtown areas as part of the textile town, and so those downtowns are being revitalized. Attempts to bring in, independently owned retail shops and movie theaters and that kind of thing. So moving forward, trying to sort of decide, okay, what's the new identity of our community? And we have, a quote from Melinda here, who's talking about it from maybe a more skeptical point of view. She says it's going to bring people back, but it's not going to bring the community back. It's going to bring a different type of people. The people that worked in the cotton mill, we were just cotton mill people. This is going to be a different kind of people. So, that interim phase where, some of the communities are still sort of in, they have been trying to get buy-in from the population and getting people on board to move forward to a new future. So that brings us to the third phase, which is merging the past with the future. Interestingly, all five of these towns had hard lessons to learn, trying to figure out how to stay afloat, how to stay alive. These are largely rural communities, so there isn't a city to absorb the impact of the closure or the unemployment that would happen. And so thinking about, what can we do that will help us be sustainable as a community? And interestingly enough, sort of two things have emerged: tourism and the environment around the mill and the mill village. So many of those early companies were started in rural North Carolina, close to rivers, and sort of a natural environment that would help establish and maintain the mill. And so some of the communities are thinking, how can we bring people in for events and recreational purposes? So that those two things emerged as kind of sort of common points among the five towns, and really sort of at the more abstract level, it's about diversifying the economic foundations. And as Mark points out here, I think something we've learned from what we've seen from closings of large textile mills is that when you have all your eggs in one basket and somebody drops the basket, you break all the eggs. So this idea of diversifying their economic portfolio, yet at the same time really trying to hang on to that textile heritage. A lot of the participants that I spoke with are very concerned about that history being lost, that heritage just disappearing. And in one case, in one of the towns, actually one of the mill buildings was turned into a textile museum, a textile heritage museum, to talk about the industry's role, not just there, but across North Carolina, as well as the company that the town was sort of founded around. So as far as the research study, it's ongoing. I have to say it's been very rewarding, but at the same time, it's kind of heartbreaking. It's difficult to talk with the people who are technically neighbors, being here in Greensboro, which is also in the Piedmont, and finding that these individuals are not just unemployed but unemployable, because there isn't that industry that they could in the past move from mill to mill if they wanted to. All the mills, not all of them, but pretty much most of them are gone. So, and a lot of the participants in my study do not have a high school education, did not need one, working in the mills. Interestingly enough, though, and I'll say one last thing before I pass it back to Elena, but a lot of the companies that, well, at least that I spoke with, former employees of, offered scholarships for their employees' children to go to college. And so it was, in a way, that looking toward the future, those employees, their children were not going to go to college to go back and work at a mill. And so, you have globalization of the supply chain, you have automation, but you also have this idea that, the next generation will do better. And in this case, they did not go back to work in the mill. Thank you again for having me as part of this panel.
Okay, we do have a couple questions, Nancy, in the chat. Some of them are a little more specific, like what are the names of the towns that you studied? Maybe you can give a couple as examples.
Sure, yeah. Well, the case study that I included in the chapter is the town of Kannapolis, which was founded by Cannon Mills, which ultimately was taken over by Pilotex, and was the last company to exist there. Pilotex closed in 2003, and with that closure, actually 4,000 people lost their jobs in North Carolina in one day. So that was probably the most widely known situation in North Carolina. Eden is another location that is included in the study, which is a little bit north of Greensboro. Kannapolis is just outside of Charlotte. So a lot of the Mill Village homes there are priced out of reach of the former mill employees because it's considered sort of a commuter town to Charlotte. And so they, even if they wanted to buy those homes, they couldn't at this point. So
another question asking about if the textile and cotton mill workers were unionized and were they making pretty good wages at the time of closures, and how those wages are compared to the newly created jobs in some of those communities.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So North Carolina has historically been a right-to-work state. It's been very much anti-union. There's a movie, actually with Sally Field in it. I can't remember what it's called. The title is escaping me right now, but it's based on a story of a manufacturing facility that was trying to unionize north of Burlington, which is Norma Ray. That's it. Thank you. Just to the east of us here. So most of the companies here were not union. The wages, to address the wages question, that's relative. They were certainly better than the wages that some of them got once they had to go work at Subway or Walmart. They had full-time employment with the mill. They had insurance. They, had benefits that, were gone once they were looking at, the only part-time employment, retail primarily employment. So it was, about maybe, well, it really depended on how long they worked for the mill, how much they made, but they could make upwards of $20 an hour. They, had supervisory roles. So
maybe last quick question so we can move to the next presenter. So getting new companies in those towns and new jobs is certainly better than nothing. However, we could see from the quotes that people are missing a sense of community, a sense of common purpose, an identity for the town. So have you seen them being able maybe to get a new identity and then sense of purpose or not?
Yeah, I think for the most part, all 5 of the towns in my study have been successful, to one degree or another. It's not been easy, but it's literally taken a village, not to make a corny pun, but basically getting everybody on board in terms of, the community leaders and the companies that are still there, focusing on small business and entrepreneurship. That's another sort of area that the communities have targeted. I mentioned, independent retail shops. I'm interested in going back into the field now, hopefully once the pandemic subsides a little bit, to find out more about, whether that set these communities back, especially in terms of small businesses and, the move toward, sort of event planning, like, come to Eden and have your wedding in a very beautiful, natural setting kind of thing. What has happened as a result of what we've all just been going through with the COVID issue.
Thank you. And I will turn it now back to Sarah to introduce our next panelist.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you, John and Nancy. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jana Hawley, who serves as Dean of the College of Merchandising, Hospitality, and Tourism at the University of North Texas. Hawley is a Fulbright Scholar to India, a Hearst Fellow, ITA Fellow, Administrative Leadership Fellow, and a Kemper Fellow in Excellence in Teaching. Her scholarly work focuses on international craft development, textile recycling, and fashion industry sustainability. Jana shared a fun fact for tonight that she has been a thrift store shop for over a quarter century, but that today she is focused on finding original Scandinavian furniture and Blenko, is that the right way to pronounce it? Blenko yes. Art glass for her home. I turn it over to you, Jana. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Elena, for inviting me to be on the panel tonight. My presentation actually goes over the last two chapters of the book, and it talks about both the good and the bad and the ugly and the good of the fashion industry. So I'm going to give just an overview of how I got here. I'm sort of known nationwide as the recycling guru, but there's a path on how I got here, and I'll do it quickly. So way back in 1975, I took an undergraduate biology class called Can Man Survive? And that was so early in the thinking about the planet. But I became really committed to doing the right thing in that class. And Dr. Flea Hardy became one of my favorite all-time teachers. So early in my academic career, I wanted to do something with my research that was bigger than the consumption of fashion. So I started qualitative research in recycling. And all of you know that as an academic, we often get to travel the world. And what I have become particularly interested in my world travels is the makers of textiles. Many of these makers live in rural villages of developing countries, and they produce product that barely meets their sustenance. For the last 10 years, I've worked as a volunteer at the International Folk Art Market in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where these artisans are juried into this fabulous festival and have an opportunity to take their products to the global marketplace. As I've watched the consumers of these products, I have learned that they consume the story of the product and the maker as much as they do the product itself. And then more recently, I was introduced to donut economics. And with that, I became a believer that connecting the producer to the consumer through the human touch, which ties back to what Elena and John both talked about tonight. But the human is what allows us to slow our consumption down and to make meaningful and thoughtful purchases rather than just buy. So the one thing that my thought has evolved with is that we can't think of just recycling, and this is addressed pretty well in the book. And we have to start instead thinking of circularity, where we can no longer think of resources as expendable, but we have to think of them as a finite resource. So when I started the journey of sustainability scholarship back in 1997, I was inspired by apparel textile recycling centers that are located mostly in metro centers throughout the United States. And with those studies, I decided that what we needed to look at is the recovery and reuse of textiles, and even more importantly, the concept of circularity. Circularity looks beyond the traditional take, make, and waste extractive model, and instead looks at how we can keep the resources going again and again. And what this requires is that we decouple the traditional economic models from the consumption of finite resources. So what we have to do is need to design out from the beginning any waste and pollution. We need to keep the products in circulation for longer and maybe even forever, theoretically. And then we need to also learn how to regenerate our natural systems. In other words, circular models build economic, natural, and social capital. So we have to think what we're looking at and what our goal is that we have to realize that there are finite resources, we have landfill capacity, and that when we manufacture and use, we leave a footprint. So companies large and small are finally starting to understand that they are leaving a footprint. Recently, I worked with a graduate student who conducted a study that resulted in this really useful, expansive, dynamic spreadsheet. It's just a giant spreadsheet that demonstrates how companies can do decision making that can have positive impact on their greenhouse gas emissions. They can change their supply chain, they can change how products are used or how products are maintained. And then by making those decisions early on, they can measure what their greenhouse gas emissions would be. So as more and more companies understand their impact on climate change, more and more products will finally become available that contribute to circularity. So as my research has evolved, I strongly believe that we need to value the makers of products and the stories behind their production. When consumers feel connected to the maker, they are way more likely to cherish the product and keep it in use for longer. In other words, it contributes to slowing and reducing consumption. At the same time, we need to connect the consumer to the maker. And at the same time as the consumer is connected to that maker, the maker finally starts to earn a fair wage and even a living wage that can help not only their families, but their communities. I've often watched the makers from the crafts that end up at the folk art market take monies home and be able to build schools for children and clean water systems. So it's really making a big impact. I actually dream of a future when consumers can own or rent a very limited number of high quality garments rather than overpacked closets full of cheap goods. And then we can embellish them with these wonderful products that can accessorize our high quality clothing. And it also allows us to connect to people around the world. So this has brought me to my latest thinking. And in the last couple of years, I've been studying the writings of a renegade economist out of Britain named Kate Raworth. First of all, I have to say that economics are all around us and we simply can't walk away from it. But I believe, and I also believe that more and more are starting to agree, that our traditional economic models that we all learned as undergraduates are fundamentally flawed. They are built on the idea of constant growth with a purpose of growing shareholder profits. In the center of Raworth's model is the social foundation of humanity. Again, this goes back to what Nancy and Jung brought it forward, and it's about the human. But then on the outside of her model, she talks about the 9 planetary life support systems that we need to think about. We have to ask, now, how do we ensure we have the resources to meet our human rights, but within the parameters of the planet? So progress on the donut model is not about constant growth. Instead, it strives for balance between human needs and planet capacity. So imagine if each of us asks ourselves how we as individuals can contribute to human needs and planetary integrity. We have to constantly stop and ask ourselves how we shop, how we eat, how we travel, how we earn a living, how we do our banking, how we vote. So in addition, not to get political, but I do think that we have to think about these things. So in addition, what if every company asked, is our brand a donut brand? So Jung mentioned this earlier, but it has long been my mission to make sure that our graduates have the knowledge and the ethical courage that they need to challenge companies to make sure that they are producing donut brands. So Raworth takes circularity a step forward and suggests that we need to think in terms of ecosystem instead of just circularity. And let me give you an example. Instead of thinking how we can keep clothing in the system as clothing, she suggests that we develop an entire ecosystem so that when products are made, consumed, used, and discarded, there is another company, any kind of a company, not necessarily clothing, that is ready to use that clothing as raw materials for their products. So it is not just the circularity of clothing to clothing, but clothing to something else that is useful. Which brings me back to recycling. I often get asked what people should do with old clothes that are stained, ripped, missing a button, or out of style. I always say, get it into the recycling pipeline where it may end up as clothing, or it might also become housing insulation, cement fill, your dog's pet bed, and even fertilizer for crops. So we cannot continue to have constant growth. And I encourage each of you to take a look at Raworth's ideas. She's all over the internet. She's really getting a big buzz in Europe. She offers way more than I can recap in a 10-minute presentation, but I really think you should look at her ideas, and we should maybe think about her models as the economic models we embrace. So getting our huge apparel industry to make change is not easy. It requires changes in government policies, in business models, and in your own behavior. Think about the difference you can make, and let's make change. Now, it ain't easy, but it is necessary. Thank you. So I want to give a shout out to my co-author for these last 2 chapters of Dangerous Fashion, Dr. Elena Karpova herself from UNCG. I love working with this brilliant woman as we challenge each other's ideas and help make progress on this important topic. Thank you.
Fantastic presentation. Thank you, Jana. One of the questions that has kind of come up in each of the 4 sessions that we've had has been around this idea that sustainable products are available, but they're not necessarily accessible to a very wide audience. And I just wondered, you know, how can we ensure that sustainable fashion becomes more equitable to those at income levels? I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
So I do think that we are going to start seeing it become more normal. At my recent advisory board meeting, some of my C-suite executives that I have on the board were all commenting that they want to create a donut brand, but they don't know how, and they are so anxious to get this next generation of students in. But the students have to have enough knowledge and enough ethical courage to tell their bosses, this is what we need to do. So I do think we're at the cusp of it becoming mainstream, and the prices will come down when that happens. But I'd like to address a little bit the limited number of high quality garments, and how is it that a consumer can do that. I think we need to teach spend your budget to the best, you know, not spend your budget to the most. So if a person has $1,000 a year annual budget, what would be the 3 or 4 fabulous garments that they could buy that would build a wardrobe? Back when I was a young undergrad student, the build a wardrobe concept was really big. And companies like Eileen Fisher are doing build a wardrobe so that their colors from one season to the other coordinate, and you can build from clothes. I have Eileen Fisher hanging in my closet that's 10 years old and I still wear it, and it works with their new pieces. So it's a responsibility of the company, but it's also a responsibility of the consumer to buy quality. We don't teach quality anymore very well. So we need to be teaching what quality means and how we can buy the best with the budget that we have.
I would argue we don't teach budgeting either anymore.
That's true.
You know, how to think about your finances. Well, thank you, Jana. Elena has a question for all of the panelists. I'll turn it over to Elena.
And I would like to invite, thank you so much, Jana. It's such a pleasure to work with you. And I would like to invite John and Nancy at this point to come back so we can see you again. And Jana did talk about this a little bit in her presentation. And so, as we understand it, the capitalist economy, with its constant focus on profit growth, is at odds with the idea of sustainability, right? We cannot grow continuously and continue to grow with GDP and consumption and everything else. So, is it possible to reconcile capitalist principles with sustainable principles, or should we be looking for new business models, as Jana a little bit talked about? But I also would like to hear from John and Nancy on this, and certainly Jana, if you have a little more something to add.
I wouldn't make this political or capitalist system be the problem. To me, it's not the system that make us unsustainable. To me, it's a lot of ethical people in doing the right thing are also very successful. I mean, there are so many examples nowadays that the companies are born with this sustainability goals, and people are, the companies are thriving. So, if we start saying, I mean, some people may say this system's so bad, so we can't do anything about it. But the reality is, we are very entrepreneurial. We are survivors, meaning we'll find an opportunity. So I'm not going to say it's the system that is against the sustainability. I think sustainability will influence the capitalistic system that we have. That's why there are so many stock analysts nowadays. They not only looking at the earning report, but they also look at sustainability report, because earning report is a quarterly based, but the sustainability report is the future projection. So, how many stock prices do you see today right now based on how much money they made last quarter? People are buying the stock nowadays for the future growth, right? So whether that is a technology or sustainability, people do believe now that those investments that companies are making in technology and sustainability will be profitable in the future. So when I said about the bottom line, is a bottom line in what? Is that a bottom line in 3 months? Are you going to make a decision based on the bottom line in 3 months? Or are you going to make a bottom line decision in 3 years? But even 3 years, though, if you don't have money to pay your salary, your employee salary tomorrow, that vision's not going to work. So we have to teach our students to balance both, instead of A is bad, so we have to look for Z. The reality is, how do we find something in the middle so that we can tackle both? So that's my personal opinion, but I'm sure other people have different opinions. Thank you, Lilena.
I guess I can respond from the perspective of my chapter. I think part of the reason that I wanted to write about this for this particular book is the idea that what happened here in the South can easily happen anywhere. And I think Kelly posted a chat comment about how, it happened in Rhode Island. I mean, that's what happens in the Northeast when the industry moved to the South. It was just quite a bit longer ago, I guess, than here. But the very same thing could happen, if you think about it, and be far more devastating in communities in Bangladesh or Cambodia, or wherever the industry has been and is leaving to go to the next, cheap place to find workers. And so, it's sort of being kind of looking more long term. It's interesting at ITAA when I was in a session about industry, textile and apparel industry topics, and we were having a discussion, this is back in November, because my paper was about reshoring, and there were concerns expressed by faculty who are from Bangladesh, working, having gone through PhD programs here, and now faculty in apparel programs here, about, okay, so if reshoring happens and the industry comes back to the United States, what will countries like Bangladesh do? And it's like, I think there has to be enough to go around, right? There doesn't have to be this kind of economic and human devastation that happens when the industry decides to pick up and move. But the other side of the coin, I think, to this conversation is not just the companies, but it's the consumer. The longer the consumer continues to want, to have more clothing than they could possibly ever begin to wear, and at really low prices, I think, yeah, some of it's on the company, but it's also educating consumers. And I'm always heartened by, the generation that's in our classes right now, the traditional college students right now of Generation Z, who I think just bring that whole point of view with them to the major and to our classes, and hopefully to the workplace. So I have my fingers crossed for that.
Thank you.
I'd like to add just quickly that if we could slow the pipeline down so that workers are creating quality clothing instead of cheap stuff, that the work environment's going to improve also. So I'm just that's a quick addition.
On behalf of Elena Karpova and myself, we just want to thank you all so much for your participation. The panelists, as I think you'll all agree, have been fabulous. We do encourage you, of course, to check out the book. And if you've missed one of the panelists, you can go to the Costume Society of America YouTube channel. Thank you again for your time and energy. And I would be remiss if I didn't give a huge shout out to Graham and Sarah Behrens for their incredible work in making sure that these panels go as smoothly as they do. Thank you all and good night.